Relations between the settlers and the native people would deteriorate into the devastating King Philip's War, which ended with death, enslavement, or displacement for the majority of the native people living in southern New England. So there you have it. This is the true story of Thanksgiving. Hello again. Welcome to The Ruthless Truth. I am your host, Truth Davis. In this forum, I share opinions, thoughts, truths on a wide variety of topics based on what I believe to have been a unique life experience. And you can read more about that in the notes or in the bio. My intent is to share stories, perspective, and hopefully some life and career lessons that'll help you on your journey. Please follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5 and subscribe to the YouTube channel Ruthless Truth. General format, I'll share some thoughts, opinions on current items in the news. Then I'll have a deeper discussion on one topic, which will be today's truth. And then I like to finish with an American history fun fact. Okay, first thing, a couple of follow-ups from last week's show. In that episode, I suggested blowing up through the traditional Thanksgiving menu and trying some new things, especially because a lot of people aren't that crazy about turkey. Oh my God. You know, I thought I had some hot takes in the past, but nothing I have ever said received more reaction and comments than taking a shot at Thanksgiving dinner. You know, most of the people coming at me kept referencing tradition, and they were also defending turkey. Okay, fine. I always ask for your comments, and I got them. But what tradition? Thanksgiving tradition? Okay, well, just hang on for a few minutes, because I'm going to tell you the true story of Thanksgiving in today's truth. Then we'll see if some of you still feel the same way about tradition. Okay, second follow-up. I also provided guidance and thoughts for young women looking to marry a millionaire. Interestingly, I really didn't hear that much from young women, but older women had something to say. One, they wanted me to know that women are not washed up after 40, which I did acknowledge. Last week I said I didn't believe that, and I know many women in their 50s and 60s who are still smoking hot. Then, the next question, well, what advice do you have for older women who still want to get married? Not necessarily to a millionaire, but just to a good man. Okay, that's a good and interesting question. But you have to first recognize that there are two types of older men who want to be married. The first type are men who genuinely value marriage. They may be single because of divorce or even for being a widower. They've been married before and they would like to be married again. These are your good guys. Now, the other group consists of maybe players who've gotten old and the game has passed them by, or maybe they just don't have the energy to be out in the streets anymore. So now they want a woman in the house to help take care of them, because that's not something young women really do. Or they just may be afraid of dying alone. When you see this guy, run fast. You'll get nothing out of this but a shorter life expectancy. You know, it's a fact that married men live longer than single men, while single women have longer lives than married women. Why? Because married men are sucking the life out of their wives. Wives make life easier for their husbands, while husbands make life harder for their wives. Okay, but if you're still older and in the market, there are options available to you. First, check your social network and see if any of your friends know a potential guy that you could meet. My second recommendation is online dating services. Now, I know a lot of you are uncomfortable with this, but I personally have three close female friends who remarried in their 50s, and all of them found their future husbands online. Hell, the newly elected mayor of New York met his wife on Hinge. And finally, you just got to get out more. Go to places where the men are. Take golf or tennis lessons. Join a gym that has an older clientele. So I'm not talking about LA Fitness here, okay? Get active in charities or nonprofits. They often have social or fundraising functions where high quality men are often in attendance. So I hope that helps a little, and good luck out there. Okay. Lots of major stories in the news, but I'll just touch on the recent vote by the U.S. House of Representatives to pass a bill calling for the release of the Epstein files. And the vote was just one short of unanimous. And then it was sent to the Senate, where it was quickly approved unanimously. So all that's left now is for the president to sign the bill, which he said he would do. He said that earlier this week. We'll see. So now there's all this energy and anticipation and celebration of what we will all finally learn about the horrific Epstein chronicles. Please forgive me for not sharing in this optimism. I'm still cynical. In fact, I'll still be shocked if we ever see anything material, at least anytime soon. Okay, as I mentioned, first, the president has to sign it. Well, given how between the Senate and the House, only one person voted against it, I think it'd be hard for him not to sign it. But, that's the president. And then also, earlier this week, the Department of Justice opened an investigation into the Democrats, only the Democrats, who were associated with Jeffrey Epstein. It's possible that they could say, hey, because we have an open investigation, we can't release any information to the public because we have to protect the privacy of the victims. So still a couple hurdles to clear. But even if somehow the files are released, I expect they will be heavily redacted, with much of the key information being blacked out. I'd love to be wrong on this, but we'll see. And finally, after nearly a year of hype and anticipation, Wicked for Good opens in theaters on November 21st. The movie's already set records for pre-sale tickets. And so the theaters are going to be packed on opening weekend. But let me say this. Wicked will be in the theaters for a long time. Everyone doesn't have to see it on opening weekend. You'll have plenty of time to get there. Now, of course, I know many people will argue that, no, you got to get it on the first weekend before all the spoilers start popping up on social media. Spoilers? Really? This is the story of the Wicked Witch of the West. And just about anybody over the age of 7 knows how this story ends. I really wouldn't worry about spoilers. Okay, let's get to today's truth. We are quickly approaching the Thanksgiving holiday. And as I mentioned, this is my personal favorite day of the year. No gift pressure, just family, football, food. And what is Thanksgiving? Well, most of us were taught it's the celebration of the first dinner between the Pilgrims from England and their friendly, helpful hosts, the Wampanoag Indians. It was a celebration of thanks for having survived their first year in the New World, including a brutally harsh winter. It just sounds so peaceful, wonderful, neighborly. But is it accurate? Is that really how it was? Well, let me tell you now, it was not. So now in today's truth, I'm going to tell you the true story of the first Thanksgiving. Okay, let's start with the Pilgrims. Who were they? Well, they were part of a religious sect that had rejected and broken away from the Church of England. They called themselves separatists. The actual name pilgrim would not be applied to them until over 200 years later. But, in this discussion, we'll still use the word pilgrim because that's what people know. To avoid religious persecution, in 1608, these separatists fled England and relocated to Holland in the Netherlands. They hoped they'd be happy and free to worship as they pleased. But they found the culture and language difficult to learn and understand. And they were concerned as their children were starting to speak Dutch and becoming more Dutch each day. So the separatists were concerned their native culture would become extinct. So after considering various potential destinations, they made the decision to sail to the New World so they could finally be free to live as English people and worship freely. Now, not all of the congregation were able to go. Some needed time to settle their affairs, and budgets were tight for being able to purchase the supplies needed in the New World. So they decided the younger, stronger members should embark on the first voyage, and if successful, the remaining congregation could follow later. Also, they hired military officer Miles Standish to join the voyage, serving as military advisor. So on September 6, 1620, the Mayflower set sail with 102 passengers and a crew of 25 to 30, bringing the total on board to approximately 130 people. Interestingly, only about 40 of them were actually pilgrims. The others were merchants, craftsmen, and servants seeking a better life. Now, their destination was Virginia, but bad weather and rough waters forced them to turn around, and they landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts, on November 21st, 1620, just in time for winter in Boston. And just a quick point on Boston and New England winters. I know for a lot of people in the South and the West, they just think of, quote, the North as having a single cold climate. But let me tell you, winter in Philly and New York are mild compared to the brutal winters in Boston and Cape Cod. So this was really bad planning. The new settlers were totally unprepared for the harsh winter, and the combination of weather, food scarcity, and disease resulted in only 46 of them surviving to spring. Okay, let's pause here and turn to the Native Americans. The Wampanoag tribe and their ancestors had occupied this part of North America for over 10,000 years. There was also a smaller band of the Wampanoag known as the Patusic, but they all spoke a common language called Massachusetts. And while we mostly focus on their initial encounter with the Pilgrims, the tribe had over a century of interactions with Europeans. And that experience was bloody and involved slave raiding, where natives were kidnapped and taken back to Europe for servitude. And this was the experience of Squanto, who was a member of the Patuxet tribe. He was kidnapped by English slaver Captain Thomas Hunt, who trafficked him to Spain. So having learned English during his captivity, Squanto eventually traveled to England and managed to find his way back across the Atlantic. He arrived back to his native village in America in 1619, only to find that he had become one of the last of the Patusic, as his tribe had been almost totally wiped out by an epidemic. The epidemic was a result of diseases brought by the earlier European explorers. Because here's what you need to understand about communicable disease. You have to catch it from someone. The Native Americans had been living in isolation for centuries. They had not been exposed to the various diseases and viruses that had plagued Europe, and thus they had no immunity, no antibodies. So when the Europeans made contact and transmitted the viruses they carried, the tribes quickly succumbed. And with most of his people gone, Squanto went to live with the Wampanoags. So when the Pilgrims arrived in 1620, the Wampanoag were wary, given their recent history with Europeans. Should they help them, harm them, or just let them be? Well, the leader of the tribe was Massasoit, and viewed a potential alliance as helping him defend against other tribes and potential foes. He thought allowing the Pilgrims to settle and then establishing diplomatic relationships with them, even providing aid, brought risk, but also reward. The guns, knives, and armor the Pilgrims carried would intimidate enemies that were threatening the Wampanoag territory. And after generations of trading secondhand and third-hand for coveted European goods from neighboring native peoples, the Wampanoag would finally gain a first-hand source and considerable trading power. So Massasoit weighed the risk and concluded it was better to have the danger on his side than have to face it. So to begin this process, he sent Squanto to go live with the Pilgrims. Squanto lived with them for over a year, serving as interpreter, guide, and advisor. He showed them how to farm and harvest. And by the time the Pilgrims approached the 1-year anniversary of landing in Plymouth Rock, they chose to have a celebratory feast to celebrate and commemorate their successful harvest. That feast is widely considered as the first Thanksgiving. Okay, well, here's a few facts about that first Thanksgiving. First, the Wampanoag were not invited. This was not the English and the Native Americans sitting shoulder to shoulder and breaking bread. And even though they were uninvited, the Wampanoag did show up with a contingency of approximately 100 men. They didn't come to eat. They came to flex. Massasoit just wanted to remind the Pilgrims that they were visitors and this was not their land or territory. Second, what was the menu for the first Thanksgiving? Turkey? Dressing? The other traditional items we eat today? Well, no. They ate what they had. They ate venison, duck, goose, lobster, cod, bass, and other shellfish. The vegetables, it's what they harvested. They had corn, squash, pumpkin, and beans. Cranberry sauce wouldn't be invented for another 50 years. And what about dessert? What did they have for dessert? Well, there was no dessert. Why? Because there was no sugar. Where could you possibly find or grow sugar in New England? So from there, did Thanksgiving become an annual celebration? No. In fact, Thanksgiving didn't become declared and acknowledged until nearly 250 years later, when Abraham Lincoln issued a proclamation in 1863 establishing the fourth Thursday in November as a national holiday. Lincoln hoped it would help unite a nation divided by the Civil War. And Lincoln also pardoned a turkey for that first Thanksgiving holiday, a tradition carried out by every U.S. president since. Okay, so back to 1621. What happened after that? Well, first, Squanto, having spent so much time with the Pilgrims, contracted an illness and died in 1622. And then in a little more than 50 years, European settlers would vastly outnumber the indigenous people, and with growing settlements such as the Massachusetts Bay Colony to the north and Rhode Island to the south. And by the 1670s, Massasoit was dead. His son Wamsuta had died after he was imprisoned in Plymouth for negotiating a land sale to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. At the same time, colonists were pressing deeper and deeper across the region. Relations between the settlers and the native people would deteriorate into the devastating King Philip's War, which ended with death, enslavement, or displacement for the majority of the native people living in southern New England. So there you have it. This is the true story of Thanksgiving. Now, please continue to celebrate with your family and friends. It's still a great occasion to get together. But just know, the truth is considerably different than the prevailing narrative taught in this country. Let's get to today's American History Fun Fact. Today's American History Fun Fact. Today, I want to discuss and make you aware of the Religious Society of Friends, better known as the Quakers or just the Friends. And while I'm sure almost all of you have heard of the Quakers, if for no other reason than from Quaker Oats, I'm equally sure that you probably know little or nothing about them. And that's understandable. They're not exactly self-promoters. I learned about the Friends when my family and I relocated to Philadelphia. My sons attended Germantown Friends School, which was founded in 1845. I won't get into it here, but it was a phenomenal educational experience, which I struggled to properly put into words of how great it was. I realized how little people knew about the Quakers when one of my relatives asked me how my sons were attending a school that didn't have electricity or lights. I was at first confused by the comment until I realized the issue. And I responded, "Oh, you're thinking about the Amish." And I gave them a little bit of a break by acknowledging that the Amish are also heavily present in Pennsylvania. Anyway, back to the Quakers. The Quakers were founded in the mid-17th century by George Fox, who, like the Pilgrims, rejected the Church of England. The Friends are generally united by a belief in each human's ability to be guided by the inward light to make the witness of God known to everyone. Early followers were called Quakers after George Fox told a judge in England to, quote, quake before the authority of God. So to flee persecution in England in 1656, the Quakers migrated to North America, initially to Boston. But the early Quaker preachers were deemed heretics, and they were imprisoned. Additionally, their books were burned and their property was seized. And in 1660, 4 Quaker preachers were hanged in Boston for defying a Puritan law that banned Quakers from the colony. The Quakers eventually settled in the 3 colonies that welcomed them: West Jersey, Rhode Island, and Pennsylvania. In 1682, led by affluent Quaker William Penn, Pennsylvania was established as a commonwealth guided by Quaker principles. The Quakers were the original abolitionists. Slavery was openly denounced in 1688 when 4 German settlers, joined by 3 Quakers, issued a petition against slavery from Germantown, which at that time was near but not yet a part of Philadelphia. The Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society, founded in 1775, consisted primarily of Quakers. And by 1776, Quakers in the American colonies were prohibited by their yearly meetings from owning slaves. And in 1790, the Society of Friends petitioned the United States Congress to abolish slavery. Over time, the Quakers expanded and moved into other colonies, but they still maintained their opposition to slavery. But because of their anti-slavery stance, they were unpopular in some places, and eventually entire Quaker communities were run out of Georgia and South Carolina. In North Carolina, it was actually illegal for a slave owner to manumit or free a slave. So instead, they would sell them to the Quakers, who would take the newly acquired slaves to the free states where they could be emancipated and set free. Additionally, the Quakers were prominently involved in the Underground Railroad. For example, Orthodox friend Levi Coffin started helping runaway slaves when he was a child in North Carolina. And then in 1826, Coffin and his wife Catherine moved to Randolph County, Indiana, where their home became known as, quote, Grand Central Depot on the Underground Railroad route north from the Ohio River. And Coffin himself became known as the president of the Underground Railroad. In 1847, the Coffins moved to Cincinnati, where Levi opened a free labor store, and the couple continued their Underground Railroad work. And there were many other Quaker depots across the Underground Railroad network. As for theology, the Quakers are Protestant Christians who follow the teachings of Jesus Christ. They believe there's a little bit of God in all of us. So when we get together as a group, there's more spirit in the room. This is called meeting for worship and usually takes place at the meeting house. This is an unprogrammed service where friends sit in silence. And then at any point during the meeting, an individual may speak if they feel compelled to do so. Usually when that person feels that the spirit, whatever they perceive it to be, has guided them to give a message to others. After someone speaks, several minutes are traditionally allowed to pass before anyone else speaks. This allows the congregation to consider the message carefully. Quakers do not answer or argue about others' message during meeting for worship, and the duration of these meetings is usually about an hour. As part of the school curriculum, my sons attended meeting for worship every week. One last item about the Quakers. When Hurricane Katrina hit, the Quakers were like the first to respond. The American Friends Service Committee provided immediate relief, including a significant monetary donation, while other Quaker groups coordinated with meetings to assist evacuees. You didn't hear much about this in the news because, as I said, the Friends are not self-promoters. They just quietly go about the business of helping the communities they serve. Okay. That's all I have for you today on The Ruthless Truth. Thanks so much again for listening. Again, follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Ruthless Truth. And there's also a Facebook page, Ruthless Truth. Thanks again. I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I will talk to you soon.